Vlad. Want to come ahead? So our first talk is going to be by Vlad, who produced this wonderful magazine here. So, Breaking Fact with Vlad.
Good morning, girls. I hope you guys have a lot of energy and you're very excited for another day of presentations. I have my slides on this laptop and I hope it's going to work. But until then, I prepared some magazines that I want to pass along so you get to take a look at them. Basically, they're not for free. There's also a bundle with €40 and you also get a t-shirt from the conference. So I'm going to put 2 of these on every row and you can pass them behind. You can look for as much as you want, but by the end of my presentation, please give them back. Or buy them. I appreciate the compliments that I heard from the audience. I know that this is being live streamed. It's a premiere on the Bitcoin Takeover channel, and it's an honor for me to host the content. I think this restarted. And I get to see all the apps on my Windows laptop. That's recommended. I don't want to recover. Are you sure you want to cancel? Yes. Finally. So the reason why the template is not the most beautiful is that I have been using OpenOffice as opposed to Microsoft Office or whatever. But I guess it's readable. So the title of my presentation is Breaking FUD, my plans to onboard the next 1 billion people to Bitcoin. Basically, the assumption from which I'm starting is that Bitcoin has been around for 14.5 years. Most people around the world know about it. But the problem is that most of them know what the government or the mainstream media has told them about Bitcoin. And there are certain ideas that you cannot really get out of their heads unless you take a different approach. As most Bitcoin education starts from the assumption that you should go through Austrian economics, or maybe you should learn about cypherpunk culture, and from that, maybe you're going to have the ideological predisposition to onboard the Bitcoin space, which is utopian. I think a better approach is to take the reverse approach, to tackle exactly what concerns them and what they don't like about Bitcoin, what it is that they think is terrible and why they think that Bitcoin is going to fail, and explain to them why it's not really like that. So what is FUD? It's a very popular abbreviation for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And people use it usually to dismiss. When something comes along and there's some news about something, they're going to say, no, it's FUD, which means that it's untrue. But at the same time, it's also a self-defense mechanism when you're faced with new information and you are in a situation where your version of reality is being confronted by new information. You're going to deny it first, so you're going to fear it, you're going to feel uncertain about it, and you're going to doubt it until you are being presented good enough proof to change your opinion. What is the Bitcoin FUD? And in order for me to write this magazine, which is called Breaking FUD, I actually appealed to the almighty oracle of ChatGPT and asked it, what are the top 10 biggest threats to Bitcoin? And I was given these answers, and I took it as a challenge, as a man versus machine battle. And I wrote the articles without ChatGPT, but basically to explain why ChatGPT is wrong about describing Bitcoin, why government regulation will not put an end to it, why altcoins will not replace it, at least not in the current design with blockchains and stuff, that it doesn't scale, and there are lots of efforts in this regard that do not get enough attention. It might have security issues. I actually wrote this article in collaboration with Peter Todd, who's not here, and also Pavel Rusnak from Trezor, better known as Stick. And they provided some feedback on some of the technical terms. Basically, I explained how quantum computing is not there and cannot break the cryptography behind Bitcoin. I also explained how hard it is to brute force a BIP39 seed phrase or a passphrase from Bitcoin Core. And yeah, I think this is a very important topic to be discussed, and a lot of people are concerned about security in Bitcoin, and I'm happy that I have an article about this. There's also one about volatility, and volatility is always something relative, like volatile against what? If you only compare to the US dollar, it might be super volatile. But if you compare to the Turkish lira or the Venezuelan currency or the Argentinian currency, you're going to realize, okay, Bitcoin is actually at an all-time high right now as compared to these local currencies. And volatility is only used usually to complain about, not the positive side, which means that it appreciates against that fiat currency. So I also took the time to explain that. There's also use case, silly. This is, one of the most common criticisms of Bitcoin, that it's a one-trick pony, it's only a store of value, it cannot do stuff, but pretty much everything that you see, like 80% of the stuff that you see on Ethereum was made on Bitcoin with counterparty. And on layer 2, there is so much stuff that you can build, and it's more scalable, it's more elegant, and I'm pretty sure as a Bitcoin maximalist, and my version of maximalism doesn't mean that Bitcoin is already perfect and you don't need to improve it. My version of maximalism is that you can integrate everything that's interesting from altcoins on a layer of Bitcoin to make it more scalable, more private, and faster. There's also an important article about the energy consumption of Bitcoin, about the meme that it burns the oceans. And I think the best source to debunk that, I wrote like a 12-page article. It's the longest in the magazine, and I spent so much time explaining why Bitcoin is important, first of all, because usually when people say Bitcoin is boiling the oceans, it's a very nihilistic argument. It means basically that they don't want it to exist and they don't think it has anything legit. So they're like, yeah, we should end it because we have banks, we have proof of stake or whatever. And I think Cambridge University has the best kind of statistics that you can find, and they even have a graphic that's called apples versus oranges, in which they explain, they put energy consumption of Bitcoin, which is super transparent because you can see the hash rate and you know how much energy consumption there is for the average ASIC miner, so you can determine the energy consumption by that. It's very easy to calculate. So they put it in the perspective of other energy consumers, and you're going to see that televisions that are open idly in the US consume half of the energy of Bitcoin, and that's only TVs that you leave on at night for no reason. And also air conditioning, which we are all enjoying in this room, is about 5 times more energy intensive worldwide than Bitcoin is. So when you put this into perspective, and you also think about clothes dryers, which also consume almost as much energy as Bitcoin, you're going to realize, okay, there is room in the world for this. It's not like it's boiling the oceans, which is the meme. And also, it's not like if you put more energy into Bitcoin, you're gonna mine more coins. That's also something that gets misunderstood in mainstream media. If you put more energy into mining, you're going to get the same reward, and the difficulty will go up for everyone, which means that some miners will drop out. So the difficulty readjustment is probably the smartest part of Bitcoin, but Thomas might disagree with me. And there's also an article about the centralization of mining and what it means to have a mining pool, how mining pools are governed, to which extent mining pools can make decisions on behalf of the participants, and what it means when you see a mining pool from China, for example. Let's take Ant Pool. I think that's the one by Bitmain. It's easy to point your finger and say, yeah, this is run by the Chinese government, but it's hard to figure out that myself from Romania, I can mine with that mining pool, and I don't have to necessarily agree with it. I just take the rewards for as long as I am fine with what the mining pool is doing. And I think this is also something that needs to be addressed, and I wrote an article about it. And the last two are about education and understanding and mainstream acceptance. I think they're kind of silly, but they still deserve their fair share of attention because, you know, ChatGPT, it knows what people are concerned about, and this is my alarm on my phone, sorry. And this is the result of my work. This is the third annual magazine that I produced. It has a cover that's not inspired by Breaking Bad. Please don't sue me, AMC Studios. And it's AI generated, actually. And I want to thank the sponsors who made this possible, and Wojciech from Crypto still is here, so I can thank him in person. There are 13 articles in this magazine, which has 100, no, not 100, it has almost 90 pages. There is a foreword which explains my personal history with FUD and how I discovered Bitcoin very, very early on, and I thought it was a stupid idea. And I went through a process which, you know, I tried to not necessarily stop, but prevent a bit with my magazine, because if I had this 10 years ago when I read about Bitcoin, I would have bought without thinking too much. Because I wish I had all of this information, because the concerns that I had in the back of my mind as a university attendee who was very much into status ideas, I just wish I knew what I know now, and I guess this is the beauty of human civilization. You can build something that the next generation can enjoy and not worry about.
We all wish.
Yeah, exactly. We all wish. And we all wish we didn't go voting so we lose our Bitcoin. We're going voting tomorrow, so I hope you're excited. There are 10 articles which cover the most popular Bitcoin FUD, which you have already seen in the previous slide. There is one article about more serious Bitcoin FUD, because I think that fungibility and the security budget are kind of serious concerns. You want one unit to be accepted as all the others without any taint or whatever. And this is at the social layer, of course. You decide that this coin should not be there and this one should. But human subjectivity is not going to go away. So it would be nice if there was some built-in fungibility. And there's also the security budget discussion, which I think is the most interesting. It's the biggest bet in Bitcoin, the one that Satoshi made back in 2009, when he decided to have this fixed supply which diminishes every 4 years. And it's going to be interesting to see how miners are going to react to that. If the price always goes up, if the price always doubles after every halving cycle, or we're going to figure out something about filling blocks and paying more fees, or having bigger blocks or whatever. All of these are unpopular opinions. Right now, we just hope that the price will double. But you have to realize at one point that there's only so much household money in the world, and there's only so much money in stuff. So unless we believe that money printing is going to be as crazy the entire time, and they're going to secure Bitcoin just by being irresponsible, we have to also think about other ideas. And the most unpopular one is by Peter Todd, who's not here, but he believes that tail emission is not that bad, to have some sort of inflation, because he believes that a lot of Bitcoin are lost, and basically when you have tail emission, you're only recovering the lost Bitcoin. But anyway, that's another discussion for another day. And the last article in the magazine, last year I was called a dictator of sorts, because I write everything by myself. But when I wanted to get someone to write for me, they asked me for $1,000, and I was like, no, I want to do this by myself. I would rather do this by myself than pay you so much. But Rapton from Satoshi Labs, he works at Trezor right now. He wrote a story about how he convinced his friend to join Bitcoin. He was a Bitcoin skeptic, and basically he encouraged him to buy a Nintendo Switch from him using Bitcoin, and since then he has been an avid stacker. I guess that's the most fashionable term. So how can breaking FUD help? How would you help someone overcome their personal FUD? You send them a book about Bitcoin, you ask them to listen to a 2-hour podcast episode. I don't think they're going to care. I tried so many times to send them a Bitcoin book and be like, oh yeah, read this because by the end of it, you're going to finally understand it. And they did not read it. They did not care. They did not even read the foreword or the back pages or whatever. They put it on the shelf. I have this now. I have to take care of it. And what I try to do with Breaking FUD is to make every article not longer than 10 minutes so that people can read very fast. We all have short attention spans. We all spend too much time on social media. We all wish that the information was more compressed in a way that gets to the point faster than to take us through cypherpunk history, Austrian economics, and all of that stuff that we believe are prerequisites to get into Bitcoin afterwards. So I tried to take this approach, and it's also an open source project published under the Creative Commons pure license. Anyone can download it, print it, modify it, and even sell it without paying any royalties. This is what Mallorca Blochain Days is doing with this edition, which has palm trees on the cover. It's more special than the others, and only 23 of them were printed. So there's also a scarcity argument if you want to purchase it. But if you don't, you can download this for free and print it yourself. It's not the end of the world. And I need to thank Chris, Andre, Mike, and everyone else from the Mallorca blockchain team for supporting the magazine, because I'm not sure how many of you were here 2 years ago or last year, but I launched, where is it? Oh, I thought I had a slide with the first one, but I have a slide with last year's magazine, and the one that they printed was this one. And the people who attended the conference last year have a copy of that one, and I think they become collectibles in time, and I very much appreciate that they printed 200 of them. So thank you very much, Chris and Andre. Thanks to you guys. You printed 200 of them, and you also told me that I was not kind enough last year when I spoke about your contribution. And there's also a roadmap, because of course there is a roadmap. How can you have a project without a roadmap? So what's next after I produced this one and I open sourced it? The point is to print as many copies as I can for every major Bitcoin conference and promote it to Bitcoiners, because they are the ones who can be the gatekeepers of information for their normie friends. It's hard to go to bars and stuff like that and convince people, yeah, you should read this. They're not going to care. But if you have a close family member or a close friend who is kind of interested but has no time to get into this, it's easy to just get a copy of this and give it to them. So I already spoke with the people from Blochain, which is in Atlanta, Georgia, and is a very developer-oriented event. The Proof of Work Summit, which takes place in Prague in September, and also the Hackers Congress, which is at Parallel in Police, and it's going to have its 10th annual edition this year. And maybe I'm also going to El Salvador and La Bitcoin. I haven't made up my mind yet. But these are big conferences, and I'm going to tell you more about what else I'm doing, because I have a German translation of this already. Last year I had the Spanish and the French translation, and the Spanish one never went to Spain. It only went to El Salvador, and it went to Argentina. And I think I have about 300 copies that were sent there. I'm very fortunate. If Joshua from Voltoro was here, I would have thanked him, because he financed most of the printing for the El Salvador magazine. And for this one, I already have a German translation, which is sort of in beta mode, which means that I'm waiting for actual Germans to review it, to give some feedback, to tell me if it's good enough. I think that Chris took a look at it and said that it's pretty good, which means that I'm going to also open source that one. Myself, I'm working on a Romanian translation, because at first I was not sold on the idea of a Romanian community, but I see that there are some Telegram groups, and I'm a bit excited that there are people who are interested in this information. So I'm going to do this for them. And I also spoke with some guys. There's a guy from Brazil who is working on a Portuguese translation. And I have a friend from France who's also going to do a French version. Part 2 of the roadmap is the most obvious one. So if you get 1 billion people to buy $100 worth of Bitcoin, you're going to push the price to 100K from grassroots, without banks, without BlackRock, without MicroStrategy. Fuck these guys. We can do it grassroots. And then they're going to FOMO because they see the price going up and the scarcity kicking in. And they're going to buy, and then we dump on them, we buy Toyota Supras and get 0 friends. Yeah. And then we buy the dip, of course, because the institutions have weak hands and they're going to sell, they're going to crash the price, and then we buy back and we tell them to go fuck themselves and stay away from Bitcoin. This is not theirs. Anyway, how can you support Breaking FUD to make that happen? The easiest way is to download the magazine from btctkdr.com or github.com/blavec. That's my personal repository. If you read it, send relevant content to a Bitcoin skeptic. You can also record yourself reading the articles and post on streaming platforms. And you can help translate the content in your native language. This is the best way to help to spread the word and contribute to the project in some way if you want and you have the spare time. You can also buy a print version for yourself and then bring your friends, and you can see the prices, which I added last night because I consulted Andre. So it's being sold for 25 euro, only the magazine. And they're all numbered and signed by myself and Chris, so they're kind of like physical NFTs. Or you can buy the bundle, which also has a t-shirt, and that's 40 euro. And there are other shops around the world that sell it because I tried to do some deals and have it featured in as many places as I could. There is Shoppingbit from Poland, which is kind of like the Amazon of Europe. They deliver anything that you can think of, and if they don't have it, you can order it, and they're going to get it for you. And they printed some copies, and they're selling it for $30. So I guess this one is cheaper than the one from Shoppingbit. I mean, I'm not saying you should not buy from Shoppingbit either, but that's beside the point. There's also Carlo Nicolis in Prague that's selling it. Ellen Bits, I'm not sure, Ben is here. I spoke with Black Coffee and he said he's going to make some. And they have a purple cover, just like Ellen Bits, so it's more special. I try to make every edition unique in its own way. And Crypto Cloaks, I'm still speaking with them. They're from the US. Maybe they can distribute the magazine. I don't know. It's still in the early phases of discussion. I hope it happens, but if it doesn't, I'm not going to cry, or you're not going to see me crying. But that's not manly. Anyway, you can also donate to the project to pay for translators and offer free copies to meetups or conferences. That's another way in which you can contribute. But mostly, the social way, telling people about the project is the most important. It's not about the money, it's about the mission. It's time to break the FUD because this is the kind of resource that I wish I had myself when I first read about Bitcoin. And onboarding people who need money that can be censored, confiscated, or arbitrarily inflated is more valuable than institutional adoption. That's my philosophy on Bitcoin, and that's why I'm doing this. I don't get the point of ETFs, but we can talk about that on the hallway. This is the magazine, and this was my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max. Great job. Okay, and our next talk is going to be by the banana eater, Thomas. Okay, please, warm applause for Thomas Völkling, creator of Electro Wallet, true legend.
Thank you for this So I apologize for the I have a cold, so I'm happy to have my I'll try to do as good as I can. Let me do one thing. Yeah. So okay. All right. Thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing this. It's the third time I'm here. It feels like family for me as well. So I'm the founder of Electron Wallet. I guess there's some users in the room, and I'm going to try to convince more people to use Electron. So this talk is about the privacy consequences of Lightning on wallets in general and on Electron in particular. Electron is a wallet that has both Lightning and on-chain transactions. We started to develop Lightning in 2011. Electron has been a very successful client because it had features that made it easier to use than Bitcoin Core, but without the dangers of a website. Because at that time, when it was created, the user-friendly way to use Bitcoin was to have a wallet on a website. And because you did not need to synchronize with the blockchain, which would last for a long time, and there has been a bunch of catastrophes related to that. So it was released in 2011. It's a light client that does not trust the servers or has limited trust in them because it can verify the information that is sent by the servers. Of course, it is non-custodial, which means that you own the keys, and it's also forgiving. You can recover your money from a 12-word seed. So this is all the features that contributed to the initial success of Electron. So regarding privacy, I'm going to argue that on-chain privacy, or leaking information on the chain is a lot worse than off-chain. So on-chain, you can, in Electron, you have a bunch of features that are here to help with privacy. We have recently introduced a new UTXO privacy analysis. We try to create transactions that are similar and distinguishable from Bitcoin Core. Of course, we try to avoid adverse use. Regarding the Lightning part, Electron is also kind of a lightweight client in Lightning as well because it's using trampoline like Phoenix. But we implemented multi-hop trampoline routes in order to make those trampoline payments more anonymous. We have also recently added a short channel ID aliases. The purpose of this presentation is to talk about what happens when you combine Lightning and on-chain. So this is going to be submarine swaps. Okay, let's go to the original scene of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not anonymous because every time you transact on the blockchain, you're going to leave a trace, and this trace is permanent. It is public, it can be seen by everyone. Your name is not attached to it, but the ledger nevertheless is public. So there are companies that are called blockchain analysis companies that try to recoup this information and cross it with other information. And in order to counter that, the traditional answer has been to use coin mixers and coin joins. So the other type of trace is what I call here off-chain trace. It is information that is private and transient. For example, you might leak some information to Electron servers when you use not only Electron, but many wallets actually use the Electron protocol. So it's very widespread, and you are going to leak the set of addresses that, so you want to know to whom you're leaking that. In Lightning, there is pretty good privacy. I'm going to talk about that later. So in this picture, I took this from Bitcoin magazine. You have Alice, who has a deal with a Longo dealer, and she, it's funny because it seems to be a cheap Longo, but she gets 0.2 Bitcoin for this, and then she gets 1 Bitcoin back. So this Bitcoin that she gets is now correlated with the transaction that she made, and someone who knows the Longo dealer can actually establish that the next payment she's going to make, she's the same person. So Electron has recently introduced a graphical representation of this. So what you're seeing here is UTXO privacy analysis that is showing you for each coin in your wallet the history of this coin. I mean, the history restricted to all the transactions in your wallet, because your wallet doesn't know about the whole blockchain. It knows what it has done, but you can see how a coin is related to your previous transactions, and not only using ancestors, parent transactions, but also on this particular example, you have two colors, blue parents and red parents. So red parent is something that is created when you are reusing an address. So in this particular example, you believe that you might have done private business here that is not correlated to that UTXO, but it is correlated because an address has been reused. So it's useful to know that, and this is why we included this kind of mini block explorer inside Electron, so that you have the possibility to know when you spend a UTXO whether it is linked to other transactions that are in your wallet. Okay, so let's talk about conjoint. That's the traditional answer to the original scene. So Alice and Bob can actually take part in a transaction where they contribute inputs and outputs. And the idea is that if you have a bunch of Alices and Bobs there, the outputs are not going to be easily distinguishable. And therefore, it's not really possible to know which outputs belong to which inputs, especially if there is a large number of participants. So it offers some level of plausible deniability. But you have to be aware that the conjoint transactions are actually very visible on the blockchain. So if somebody, if you're trying to spend coins that is coming from a conjoint, people are going to see it. So I'm quoting Peter Todd here, that you said that participating in a conjoint is like making a statement about your privacy. I guess that's correct. Some exchanges have been actually rejecting UTXOs that come from a conjoint transaction. So this feels a little bit like Alice and Bob being banished from the Garden of Eden after they ate the forbidden fruit, because they realized they are naked and they cover themselves in flowers. You're banished from this exchange. So I don't know if this tendency is going to be widespread in the future with more exchanges adopting those kind of measures. Another weakness of the conjoint is that it actually requires a coordinator. I don't know if it's a weakness, but we should talk about that. Oh yeah, okay, this is just a tweet. Yeah, continuation of this idea that conjoint is a speech. You can argue that conjoint is a form of speech. It's not illegal per se. So some people have really been advertising this as a form of militantism. But of course, it's also a business, because those conjoint companies, those coordinators, they charge a fee for that. So yeah, let's go to this coordination issue. In order to create this conjoint transaction, you need a coordinator. So, as always, centralization wins against decentralization, because if you do things in a centralized manner, it's more user-friendly. We all know that. That's why we all use Bitcoin, isn't it? So you have those centralized coordinators that are used by Wasabi or Samurai. And it's very simple, because if you use them, you don't need to find participants yourself. You have just a company that is doing this for you. The beauty of this is that the company does not know which output belongs to which input. They use ZK proof for that. However, you have to be aware that they nevertheless have to comply with law enforcement. So there's been a recent war on Twitter between Wasabi and Samurai I don't know all the details, but Wasabi has last year announced that they were blacklisting some coins from their services, and I don't think they did that just because nobody told them to. I mean, this if Wasabi has decided to do that, I think that whoever reached them in order to ask to do that also reached to Samurai. However, Samurai always denied this. They have this so-called canary in the gold mine thing to say that no. Well, I don't know exactly the details about that, but the idea is that they have this secret way of telling users that they have been compromised. Anyway, so what is the power of a centralized coordinator here? They can choose participants in a conjoin, and they can deny entry. Again, like in the Garden of Eden. So, I mean, okay, blacklisting UTXOs is denying entry to some participants. At least if that happens to you, you know about it. The other thing is that imagine that you are a terrorist and the police wants to know about you. If I'm the coordinator of a conjoin, I can create a conjoin just for you, where all the other coins are mine, so you wouldn't know that, but I would be able to de-anonymize you in this situation. And so, who knows? I mean, maybe law enforcement can ask those companies to do that. Anyway, okay, you can also be your own coordinator. For a conjoin, there is an article of Bitcoin magazine that explains how to do that in Electrum, but of course it's much more difficult than using a centralized service. Like I said, centralization always wins in this kind of fight. So there is a new kind of coordinator that is showing up now, which is decentralized. I mean, joint market is kind of old already. Except that it has, I don't like to call it decentralized because it uses a central point of failure, which is for the publishing mechanism. It's a market where you have makers and takers in a conjoin. But the new thing is Joinster. I mean, it's conjoin on Noster. You heard about Noster yesterday. So there is an Electrum plugin being developed in order to create conjoins with Electrum on Noster. It's not ready yet for public use. I haven't. I mean, I think it's only working on reg test at the moment. But this is nevertheless an interesting development because maybe we will be able to overcome this difficulty of finding participants without using a centralized coordinator for conjoins. Okay. So let's talk about Lightning. Like I said, Lightning has pretty good privacy. You might have heard FUD about privacy on Lightning, because of course things are not perfect. But when somebody tells you that on Lightning you can de-anonymize everything using probing attacks, I think this is totally overrated. Lightning initially has been thought as a scaling solution, but it's offering privacy as a side effect of scaling. Because first, there is, I mean, payments are not recorded on the blockchain, so no chain analysis, and that's very important. I mean, chain analysis company, they can prove what they say about you because the information is public and can be publicly verified. So law enforcement doesn't need to trust them. But if you want to gather information that is not public, that is private, then those three-letter agencies, they need to gather it themselves. They are not going to delegate this to a company that they don't trust. This is why I think privacy, I mean, on-chain privacy is something completely different than off-chain privacy, and Lightning is much better for that. So, yeah, okay, probing attacks, I believe, are exaggerated. It's been used as a criticism of Lightning. Oh, yeah, there is also something called Lightning conjoins, which actually refers to splicing. I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, but let's talk about submarine swaps. Submarine swap is an atomic swap between Lightning funds and on-chain funds. And the goal of this tool is to address liquidity issues. If you have a Lightning channel and you need incoming capacity or outgoing capacity, you can swap in a trustless manner. So I have prepared a demo for that. I hope it's gonna work. This is Alice. Yeah, okay. So Alice has been opening this Electrum wallet, and she has, as you can see, she opened the wallet this morning at 10:43. That was when Vlad was talking. And then she did 2 transactions to herself. So those internal transactions, actually, if you look at them, you see that they created more UTXOs because there is change output. So at the end of this, after those 2 transactions, she has 3 UTXOs. Then she went to a merchant to buy a plane ticket. So that's an outgoing transaction with a change. And then she has also bought books. That's another transaction. And you can see with the tool that I discussed previously that she has 3 UTXOs. And this UTXO, for example, you can see the privacy analysis. It is related to the book purchase. Another one must be related to the travel purchase. And this UTXO is only related to the internal transactions. So this new feature shows you the number of parent transactions here, and then you can click on this to see which are the parent transactions of a UTXO. Okay, now I was talking about submarine swaps. So I'm going to show you a demo. Here I'm going to send 42 millibitcoins on Lightning with the new channel that Alice has opened. And you receive a little bit less because the swap server is taking a fee. It's 0.5% in this case, plus a flat fee. The purpose of the flat fee is to cover the mining fees. And so here we go. I press OK. And what you see is there is a new HTLC there, and you have received a new transaction. So if I go back to the history, I see a new local transaction. Local means that it is not public yet. You can publish it, but Electrum doesn't publish it for you because it needs to wait until the parent transaction is confirmed. So what's happened in the background is that the server has published the funding transaction of the swap, and we need to wait 1 block. So again, I'm God because we are in the Garden of Eden, so I can create a block myself using this rec test command. So here is a new block. And now that I have mined a new block, we should see something here. So the funding transaction with the swap has been confirmed. Electrum has detected that it is confirmed, and now it has broadcast the claim transaction with the swap. And in the history, you have this compound transaction that is made of 2, so you can expand this. There is a non-chain transaction and a Lightning transaction, and it's atomic. Both either happen together or they don't because they are conditional to the pre-image of the Lightning payment being made public. So this is why you do not trust the server. Let me mine a new block just for the purpose of completion, and then this transaction is going to be confirmed. So now the amount of the transaction is only the fee, and if you expand it to see how much you sent, how much you receive on Lightning, and now you can see that in your balance, well, I mean, I should have shown that before, but the Lightning balance has decreased. The channel now has some receiving capacity. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So this is just a small presentation of the submarine swap feature. The technical aspect, I was just talking briefly about it, but submarine swap script is very similar to an HTLC. It locks the funds to a payment hash, and revealing the payment secret with the Lightning payment will also unlock the funds on the blockchain. So either the Lightning payment happens, and then it makes it possible to claim the funds on-chain, or it does not happen because the other party is not cooperating, and then whoever sent the funds to the funding transaction can actually retrieve them after a timeout, like in an HTLC. And that's important because, well, okay, sorry, I didn't plan to. Okay, submarine swaps can be abused for privacy. This is actually what I'm going to show you in a minute. It is magic because the received UTXO that you have in your wallet after the swap operation, we go back to Alice. Alice now has a new coin. Remember, she had 3 UTXOs, now she has a fourth one. And the fourth one, if you go to privacy analysis, you can see that it's not related in any way to the transactions in the wallet because it comes from an external server. So this server is sending you a coin in exchange of a Lightning payment. So that's how you can get fresh UTXOs that are not correlated to your wallet using Lightning. And it's not like in a coin join transaction because it doesn't look, I mean, it looks like a, well, it can be, at the moment, it can be, it's possible to see that it is a submarine swap transactions because we have not Taproot implemented yet. But once we have Taproot, this will be totally impossible to distinguish from a regular Bitcoin transaction. This is a tweet that broke the internet by zero-fee routing. Moving coins through Lightning and closing back out to on-chain gives you better on-chain privacy than Wasabi or Whirlpool because the UTXOs are completely disconnected. Change my mind. Actually, if you do a Lightning payment for a submarine swap, you can send your Lightning payment to any node. I mean, you can open a channel to any node on the Lightning network. So your UTXO that you're using for this channel is not going to be correlated at all to the server that is with whom you're doing the swap because the payment can use a very long route. This is another tweet about submarine swaps in Electrum this time by Open Arms. So again, the idea is that this is huge for privacy in Bitcoin. And this is the same kind of screenshot that you saw in this demo. Legal implications. Like I said, the contract that is used for submarine swap is exactly the same type of contract as an HTLC, except that it gets settled on the chain, but that also happens on Lightning. So if submarine swap is illegal, it also means that Lightning is illegal, because it's the same kind of contract, right? Okay. I want to finish the demo before we go there. So I showed you how to do a reverse swap, and then you get a UTXO that has basically no correlation with the rest of your wallet. What happens if you want to get rid of UTXOs that are in your wallet? So here Alice has 2 UTXOs, and this one is really annoying because it's correlated to this book purchase, and we don't know what kind of book Alice bought. But let's say she doesn't want this to be in her wallet anymore. She can now go to this fully spent option, and she has the option to spend it in a new channel or in a submarine swap. This option is active because she now has capacity to do the swap, given that I made the first swap of 42 millibitcoins, so the channel has receiving capacity. So let's do this. I select submarine swap. And now so this green color means that coin control is active. The submarine swap is going to use only this UTXO, and I'm going to send the value of this UTXO, which is 19 millibitcoins, and I get in exchange 19 millibitcoins. I mean, same amount minus fees on Lightning. So I press OK. So here, this is a swap in the other direction. It's a normal swap. It's called forward swap. I mean, reverse swap is what Lightning called loop out, and this is loop in, okay, if you're familiar with this terminology. Unfortunately, the name loop is copyrighted, so I'm not allowed to use it. Okay, but so here you see now I have the funding transaction on the swap, and in order for this to go on, we need new confirmations. So let's mine a new block like this. Let's wait a little bit. Once the transaction is mined, yeah, now it is mined, the server is going to proceed with the other. Well, yeah, there is a little bug. I need to refresh the GUI. Here we go. So now we have both sides. I mean, the swap is complete. We have sent the on-chain coins, and we have received the Lightning coins. So again, it's in the history it is shown as a compound transaction with two transactions, and the amount is just the fees that you paid in this column. And now, so I have increased my Lightning balance, and the coin has disappeared from my list of coins, the coin that I didn't want to see anymore. Okay, that's it for the demo. This demonstration has been using an Electrum plugin that is currently under development, because the issue now is that there is not much options for submarine swap providers. Lightning Labs have a very famous service called Loop, but only the client side is open source, the server is not. I mean, I think it's their cash cow at the moment, and they don't want to, I understand that, they don't want to open source this, but it means we cannot use it for Electrum. So we have been using Bolts. Bolts is an open source, or was an open source submarine swap provider, and they recently changed their license. They went from GNU Affero to something completely restrictive. And the official, I mean, the reason is phishing. Basically, they offer submarine swaps on a website, and their website has been cloned by phishing attackers who are just stealing money from users. Because if you do submarine swaps on a website instead of a software like Electrum, then you are highly vulnerable to whatever the website sends you. I mean, you don't run, you run code from the JavaScript, basically. So they, in order to fight those phishing attacks, they have changed the license. And it means for Electrum that we cannot use this anymore. So this is why I have started to develop a plugin for Electrum that is a submarine swap server. The QR code here, if you're interested, you can scan it. It's a link to the pull request that contains this submarine swap server. And the demo that I gave to you was using this. It was not using Bolts. There is also PeerSwap, which is a plugin for C Lightning. So it's also open source, but it cannot be misused for privacy purposes because it's only single hop, which is, I mean, it depends what you want, but if you want to misuse it, you cannot do that with PeerSwap. All right. Okay, this is my last slide. How much time do I have? Okay. Yeah, so we are going to try to further integrate this in Electrum. Currently, like you saw, you have actually to go through this swap dialog, and you have to do an extra on-chain transaction just to swap. But in the example that I showed you, Alice has been buying books, and she doesn't want the change of this transaction to be in her wallet. It's a bit wasteful to first buy the books and then do the swap. What you can do is actually, when you are doing your transaction, send the change directly to Lightning instead, and then you save mining fees. So this is one of the things that is now on my list. Send the change of an on-chain transaction directly to Lightning if you want. And that uses a normal swap. I mean, yeah, we need to actually we need to expand the protocol a little bit because we need to be able to bump the fee using RBF, and that means you have to renegotiate the swap on the fly. So these kind of technical details make it a little bit difficult. The other thing that you can do is actually pay on-chain using your Lightning funds, using a reverse swap. It's a bit similar to splicing out, if you are familiar with that. Except if you are splicing, you are actually strictly decreasing the capacity of your channel. If you do a reverse swap, then you get incoming capacity. Then the next thing would be actually to pay Lightning invoice using on-chain directly. For this, you would actually want to do splicing rather than a submarine swap. Okay, that's it for my presentation. Thank you again for attending.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. Okay, and our next talk is going to be by Judah. Please give him a applause. Thanks for coming as well.
Perfect. Thank you. So this is the first time I talk about this very interesting topic in English. It's based on right now 10 years of experience on doing business either purely on Bitcoin or crypto, or implementing crypto in different kinds of businesses. This is not only about doing like a Bitcoin company that provides services in this field. We've been using it in IT security companies and other types of companies as well. So it's all started by this place, which is called Paralelnipolis. Many people have mentioned it before. It started 10 years ago, and it started as an experiment because we were talking about this new Bitcoin thing, and it was quite interesting because other co-founders of this place said, "Okay, you're talking about this new parallel money, so let's see if it actually works. You know, geeky talk and sending coins back and forth is fun, but let's see if you can actually use it as money somewhere." So actually 10 years ago, many of you maybe were not part of Bitcoin back then. I remember that many people were actually paying for coffee with Electrum by using their webcam and laptop and scanning the QR codes at the terminal because there were not even mobile wallets or good enough mobile wallets back then. So many people were just or even typing the address, the hex out the address. So this place has a cafeteria, co-working space, institute, hackerspace, and many other parts. Back then it also had a 3D printing shop. And we wanted to see if we can use Bitcoin as the only currency. So it's not, you know, take payment from customer, change it to fiat, and then kind of pretend that we are Bitcoin only, but everything, salaries are accounted for in Bitcoin and so on. I'm a co-founder of this place, but I don't live in Prague, so I decided to do another experiment, and this was Paralelnipolis in Bratislava, which we opened in 2018 after fundraising during the bull market and seeing everything crash in front of our eyes, and this is one of the things that is kind of a limiting belief of people, that you cannot actually run a business on something as volatile as Bitcoin. So I want to say that this definitely is possible. Many entrepreneurs, when I talk to them, they are in the first part of this meme format, which is I accept fiat, and you know, Bitcoin is too volatile. I don't want to deal with it. It's too difficult. Then, if you say, okay, but there are these people who want to pay with Bitcoin. You know, they're probably rich. and maybe they don't want to buy Lambo, maybe they want to buy something from you. And if you accept their favorite currency, they will come to you and not to your competition. Many entrepreneurs will ask the wrong question. Okay, so how many of my existing customers actually want to pay with Bitcoin? It's a wrong question, because you should be asking how many of customers who would not buy from me but from my competition, how many of them will come to my business just because I accept Bitcoin. So it's actually about getting new customers that would otherwise not use your products or services. Then the next step is, okay, you want to be cool. Many restaurants, many cafeterias said, okay, I'll introduce this Bitcoin payment option. I organize Bitcoin meetups, then many people will come to my place, eat a lot, drink a lot of beer, and then I'll get my business and kind of improve the image of the company. So I think the right approach, which is not not very common, is to use Bitcoin to gain access to this new parallel economy and kind of integrate it and also use it as a payment method, use it internally in the company as a reserve and so on. So I will show you what you can do besides accepting Bitcoin. I think that's not the most interesting part of what you can do. When you talk to usually wannabe entrepreneurs, but also some entrepreneurs, you often hear things like, oh, this is not possible. You cannot run a business on something volatile. It's not possible. So just if you have this kind of belief that this can be done, just for the purpose of this talk, try to replace it with, I don't know how I would do it yet or solve it yet. So it's quite often that these crypto skeptics, they read one article about Bitcoin, and hundreds of entrepreneurs that are using Bitcoin daily are overseeing something. They're doing something that is not possible according to their beliefs. So that they're overlooking some intractable problem. I think it's not the case, and these entrepreneurs just found a way how to interact and use this in their business. So the most common question is volatility versus stability. Okay, so if I accept this payment, won't it crash tomorrow to whatever, 50% or 10% or zero, even if they read Taleb's black paper and believe it? Then the next question is, how do I do accounting? My accountant doesn't know how to do it. Many people would say, I don't want to do anything. So I want to say that cryptocurrencies in general are used by companies, in large companies that manage hundreds of millions and even billions of dollars. Some people use only cryptocurrencies. And also, Bitcoin is 14 plus years old, and it has a huge community of entrepreneurs, service providers, developers, lawyers, accountants. They're working to make it usable, and you can hire them. So if you don't know how to do accounting, just hire an accountant that knows how to do it. So it's not an accountant, but it's something that's like hundreds of starts by the volatility myth. Well, it's not a myth, but I want to say that we are all dealing with volatility, even if we don't think that we are. And the reason is the illusion of something. So our prices was, I don't know, maybe half the price that is today. Then it doubled. We had a short energy crisis, if you were exposed to the spot price of energy, and entrepreneurs often were, then the price was crazy. I wanted to buy a car. I had to wait for it for 1 year because there were shortages, and that means that prices of cars that were available right now also almost doubled in some cases. So even if you think in like euros as a stable unit of account, prices are not stable, and they shouldn't be, because they they are an information system and they tell you about the balance of supply and demand. So they reflect the changes in scarcity, and that is okay. So especially entrepreneurs, we all speculate on the purchasing power of our unit of account. So we don't live in a stable world anymore, and we just don't know it and don't believe it. So I think every business plan needs to take into consideration the inherent instability and volatility of prices. That's just how markets work. So I'll give you a quick example. So I've done this with Slovak numbers because I know where to find the numbers. So let's say I want to buy a house in a nice Bratislava for 1 million euros. But then I say, delay my consumption. Maybe I will do business, do a little bit more. So I invest into my own business. That's the essence of capitalism. Capital to produce something more. So let's say in the 1st January 2021, I use 2021 because we know that's a period. Show you why it's interesting. I invested 1 million euros in the business. Now at the end of the year, I have 1.2 million euros. Wow, one worked. Let's say the government tells us that the official inflation CPI for 2021 in the euro area is 9.25%. Very good. The margin, like many businesses, 20% margin is quite nice. Of course, it's not so nice after taxes, so I have to account for taxes. 50,000 income tax, and I think a little bit about 1,000 in income tax. Out of the profit, I have a little less than 140,000 left. Now let's account for inflation. So if I count the official inflation, European Central Bank would have bought for me that's the effect of rising prices. So after paying taxes, I'm only 40,000 real profit according to the So I look at the piece of housing in Bratislava, that's the growth of prices, and we can see that the CPI is the blue line down here, and what I actually want to buy is this line, and this is the average for Slovakia. So the CPI accounts for the rise in real estate prices, but not in the real estate that I want to buy. It takes into account some kind of general, small city, village, and so on. So if I buy the house, my personal inflation number or rise in prices is 2. So So a house that 1 million euros in January is not really after a year ago and working, we still more compared to what we had when we started business, exposed all the risk, paid all the taxes. What I want to say is that when we use official unit of account, but the prices in official unit of account are not at all, and that is bullshit because we don't buy what is in the basket. In this case, purchase this and we have something such as Bitcoin also purchasing power of the Bitcoin. But if we account official unit account, it's a myth. The bad news doesn't stop here because we accounted for business risk. Risk is an expense like it's very hard. This expense is very hard to calculate. We cannot quantify it. We can't put it into expenses and deduct it from taxes and so on. But if you want to do long-term business, you should account for business risk and you should create some kind of reserves. So most things in business are downside risks. That means people don't pay invoices. There's inflation, which is a certain loss of purchasing power. The table is not seen, but there is the top 20 inflation in the last few years. There can be decrease in demand, which can be artificial. We have seen it during the pandemic, where people were locked down, and that means they didn't go out for coffee, for example. You can that your sales or marketing is not working, suppliers do not keep up or have changed price, customers return the product. So basically what I'm trying to say, what about the upside risk? So very upside risk. You're able to produce and sell with profit. So both produce and sell are they need to be in balance. So entrepreneurship is about taking risks and making sure that the upside risks are higher than the downside risks, basically. You need to engineer these pleasant surprises or the upside risk. So, for example, someone who sits behind a computer all day playing Minesweeper will certainly not find a life partner because it kind of doesn't work this way. So you need to expose yourself to the upside risk. And I believe that entrepreneurship is a form of something I call serendipity engineering. So it's an art as much as a science. Many people say, okay, they go to Excel, they write a business plan. Okay, these will be my expenses. This is how much I will put to marketing. This is the cost of the product. This is my margin, and this is how much profit I will make. It's a very nice Excel. I have never seen it to work and any time in history. So we are in this kind of volatile environment if we are entrepreneurs. So if you are an employee, you can do this. Okay, this is my salary. This is the cost of my mortgage. So if I spend this much for food and other things, then I'm in profit and I can save. You can do it easily if you're an employee. But if you're an entrepreneur, this is not how it works. It's constant tinkering, discovery, and so on. So entrepreneurs experiment, and we try to allow good things, but nothing is guaranteed. When it comes to Bitcoin, they want certainty. They want to say, "Oh, so I need to make sure that this doesn't crash." So how do we actually use it? I have several strategies. I will underlined, and let's go straight to it. So I think businesses at some point need some kind of financial reserve, or they should build a fund for future capital investments, and that's one of the ways how you can expose yourself to pleasant surprises. For example, we had one non-profit in Bratislava, which is not Paralelní polis, and it was accepting Bitcoin for drinks. And a few years ago, they said, "Oh, who has the private key for the QR code on the wall?" And we realized that okay, there is quite enough money, and that means we have money to pay for rent, and we don't have to close our organization. So that's the exposure. So basically what they've been doing is okay, drinks, nothing too important. We will just keep this Bitcoin, just save and see what will happen. Another example is my company, which was paid by a customer in BTC. I forgot about it. Of course, the accountants didn't forget about it, but me as an entrepreneur, I look at the balance of the bank account and see what's happening. So during the COVID crisis, I would say, we have found these Bitcoins, and we didn't have to either go bankrupt or put more money in the business. So many companies are doing this. I don't particularly like all of them, but especially Proton is interesting. They said that the responsible financial classification requires holding some assets outside of the traditional government controlled banking system. That's why Proton will continue to hold a significant proportion of our reserves in Bitcoin to safeguard our independence. Yesterday I have heard a story about the tax office freezing someone's accounts, and it's not fun, and they still cannot freeze your Bitcoin account. So if you need like a reserve for a rainy day, I suggest putting it in Bitcoin might be a good idea. So how do you tame volatility? So in Paralelní polis, as I said, we only use cryptocurrencies. We don't even hedge it in any way. And the way that we deal with volatility are two strategies. For operational expenses, that is payment of employees, whatever, coffee beans, rent, and so on, what we do is we have very short accounting intervals. So basically, when you have baristas in cafeteria, for example, they don't get paid every month. During very high volatility, we even paid the salaries every day. So they had a shift, and in the evening they received their crypto, and it was up to them to deal with the volatility. So intraday volatility, you are making coffees, people are paying you in Bitcoin, and then part of that income is used to pay the employee. And if you do it right away, Bitcoin doesn't have too much time to do crazy things. So volatility during the day is quite low. So this is how you can tame it. So we do exactly opposite many entrepreneurs do. many entrepreneurs, they get invoice that is due in 30 days and they pay it on day 29, sometimes 45, sometimes never. We try to pay it as soon as we receive it, and then we're not. Capital expenses, we do exactly the opposite. We're saving part of the income into this kind of future capital expenditures, and we try to spend it only when Bitcoin is up. That means, for example, we know that sometimes in the future we would like a new coffee machine. We know how much it costs, but we can delay the consumption based on the current price of Bitcoin. So basically, on input, when we are receiving the coins, we are dollar average, because people are paying us in Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, sometimes the price is up, sometimes it's down, but it averages out. And then we made a capital investment when the price of Bitcoin is, let's say, percent of the capital fund. So what we do is we say, okay, we want 30% discount on capital. We can achieve that. We are going to wait for an unpredictable amount of time, we can our costs on capital. What if, of course, there are strategies. What if you can't do that? So, if we are in a bear market, or if we need to, like, if the coffee machine breaks down today and we need to spend that money today, what we do is we don't actually sell the Bitcoin. We use it just as collateral for a loan. It has several very interesting advantages. First of all, you don't pay any taxes because you're not selling Bitcoin, so you don't have any capital gain. So I think the best use case for Bitcoin is as a collateral. You always hold. You are just borrowing fiat. That has additional advantage that you are shorting fiat, and we are certain that fiat is inflating, so we want to be on the short side. So that's what we did with Paralelnapolis in Bratislava. We raised funds in 2017, then it crashed to 30% or something like that. It was like 20,000 at the peak and went down to whatever, 6. But we wanted to build a place. We were paying rent and we wanted to physically construct the place. So at first we were just asking around in the community, would you lend us money if we put in Bitcoin as a collateral? We put it in a multisig and got some fiat and could start building the place. Then there are, of course, many services and many options how you can actually do it. I teach people how to do it in a course and in a book, but basically you have at least these options. You just find someone to lend you an escrow the collateral. That's the easiest. You can borrow through DeFi and then withdraw through an exchange, or even better, an OTC trader, because banks don't like fiat transactions from exchanges. You can also use futures, basically a long future position, and selling Bitcoin on spot is a collateralized loan. It's the same thing, not tax-wise, otherwise it's the same thing. There's a new protocol which is called Firefish, which I advise, and they do Bitcoin without dropping and without any other chains, so it's Bitcoin Blochain. A very good strategy is you are dollar cost averaging, or always filling the capital fund or financial reserves fund, and you're never spending. You're only using it as a collateral, that way you don't pay taxes, and also as a bond you're shorting fiat, which is always good idea. Another thing you can do in business is international business-to-business transfers. They're getting worse, so many people don't understand how bad the banking system actually is, but because usually they want to do a SEPA transfer and it's free and it just works. But try sending money. For example, I have started Liberation Travel, which is a travel agency which is moving people to Paraguay and Panama. So try sending money from Europe to Panama like twice a week, and you will realize that banks will not be happy and this will not work actually. They will start calling you and then they will close your account. But with crypto payments, you can do it. I say crypto because this is a very good use case for something else than Bitcoin. I will explain that, but if the transfer is legal and you can explain it to your accountant and tax collector if you're audited, you don't need to waste your time with the bank as well. So you are doing legal business, you are paying an invoice. Why explain it to some compliance clerk at the bank? Doesn't make sense. So this is just much easier, much faster. So basically what you do is you buy Bitcoin, or in this case Monero, you pay the invoice with the Bitcoin, possibly exchange back for fiat on the other side if you need that. It's fast, secure, no questions asked, it's legal, and time is money. So if a bank is calling you and you need to send them contract and invoice and worksheet and all this bullshit and it takes 2 weeks, that's 2 weeks less of doing business and dealing with bureaucracy. Why I use Monero in this case? If I use Bitcoin as a reserve fund, if I would use Bitcoin to pay for this, that's a taxable event. So if you have 2 different cryptocurrencies with different prices, what you do is you just accumulate it, and then if you pay the invoice with Monero, which you buy and spend it all at the same time, because within the day there is no price movement from the accounting perspective, you never incur a taxable event, that you will never have a taxable income. So you basically what you do is pay a supplier, so I send 1,000 euros to the exchange. With the 1,000 euros, I send it to the supplier. I end up with 0 Monero. So there was no difference in price, no taxable income from the movement of the price of the Bitcoin. So you have this super short billing interval, and you can still accumulate Bitcoin and not pay taxes. I have one more, but I'm over time. I'll just skip this one. Let's give to another speaker. If you want to learn more, I write about how I use this in business and in life for 10 years. In my books, it's in Spanish as well, and there's the course as well. Of course, I'm happy to discuss it in detail today, so please find me. I'm happy to share my experience. Thank you.
Now we have a talk by Peter Todd. Please give him a warm welcome here. Thank you very much for coming, Peter. All right. How are we doing my slides exactly? Guys, how exactly are we doing my slides?
Yeah, well, one of you guys, my slides, whoever they cast me.
Yeah, maybe let's make a break for 2 minutes.
Why with me? Like I said, whiteboard, much easier. There we go. All right. So, yeah, you may have seen in the schedule how I was supposedly supposed to talk about RGB. Well, no one told me about that, so I'll give you these slides instead. Well, I should write a full note. And basically, I mean, this a few times, and I always like to go start with, well, how many people write a full note? Show of hands. All right, I'm pretty sure you would. But yeah, that's kind of and you know, my job here is really to convince the rest of you to run one. So if you guys want to run off to lunch, that's fine. But let's start with, well, what does a Bitcoin node do? And I mean, I like to go talk about this really in terms of information. Now, of course, one sort of information we're talking about is, well, wallets. Because wallets, of course, they need to go have transaction data. The transaction data needs to come from somewhere. And the way most wallets are implemented, they do not have a node functionality themselves. They have no way to send and receive data other than talking to some source. Like in the case of Electrum, of course, there's Electrum servers, which in turn have a node, and they're talking to the servers and asking for data. And there's also this concept called simplified payment verification, which some wallets use, some wallets don't. And basically, it's a way of saying, well, I can prove to you that a transaction is linked to a block in a header chain. Notice I said header chain, not blockchain. That's because your wallet is not downloading the whole data of the blockchain. You're only getting a link to the 80-byte headers, which gets really to the other point about what do full nodes do, which is it's really about censorship resistance. I mean, this sort of looks at it from a very different other point of view, which is, well, why does Bitcoin work? What's the security model of Bitcoin? I mean, what's really going on under the hood? And this is a wonderful quote by Satoshi Nakamoto. Bitcoin takes advantage of the nature of information being easy to spread but hard to stifle. And the interesting thing about this is one of the main things nodes do, if you had a magical ledger of some kind that anyone on the internet could upload to, and anyone could get a copy of this data, the sort of public bulletin board, if you will, you wouldn't need most of what nodes do, because you would just publish information to this magical place and just download that information, and then you could go and validate your rules. Of course, that magical thing doesn't exist. As much as Amazon would like to say that Amazon S3 is that, it's not. So one of the functions of nodes is to make sure that data is spread. Of course, this also gets the question of, well, what sort of data should be spread? And this gets down to the other thing nodes do, which is they go and apply validation and other forms of rules. Well, if we have data and we're validating it, that means we're applying some kind of protocol to it. We're kind of having some kind of filter. And this is essential for full nodes to work in practice, because if you just spread any data at all, well, someone would go and DOS attack it by just uploading an enormous pile of junk. So then you get the question of, well, what kind of changes are allowed, right? Because if you're applying rules, well, what are the categories of changes? And one of the rules is, well, how exactly does this data get passed around? And that's covered in the sort of peer-to-peer network. What is the exact protocol? There's also this concept of standardness, which is what is considered standard? What sort of transactions are considered things that we will go pass around by default? This isn't necessarily what's allowed entirely, but this is sort of what's standard. In practice, as Bitcoin has progressed, the sort of rules that we apply to the standards thing gets more and more and more niche, less important. Because basically we figured out how nearly any type of transaction can be passed around these days if you're using modern things like Taproot. But then there's also the bigger question as well. What are the rules that consider a block to be valid? And this comes down to soft forks and hard forks. Soft fork being, well, we are making the rules tighter, and hard fork being we are loosening the rules. And I'll give some more examples of this later, but the important ones about that is this is deciding what is actually a valid block. What data is allowed to be committed as a confirmed transaction. And when it comes to reasons to go run a full node, I mean, it's important to realize that when you're running a full node, you're participating in all these different types of changes and validation. But Bitcoin is not a democracy. Bitcoin nodes don't vote. And I often see this misconception where people think, well, if I run a full node, I'm directly participating in something where maybe changes need to be approved by 51%. And that's not really how it works. And the reason why this isn't really how it works gets back to, well, the censorship resistance argument all over again. Now remember, what does your full node do? Well, it contacts other computers on the internet, and it spreads data around. And this means that certain types of changes are more impactful than others. Such as, remember when I was talking about standardness, like what is sort of the data you personally will pass around, what transaction data? Well, if you refuse to relay a transaction that someone else does, one way to look at it is you are censoring a type of transaction. And provided you're in, a minority, or even a large majority, provided there's some other way to get that data around, it doesn't really matter that you personally are censoring it, right? It just means that there's some path to get to a miner. Now, soft forks and hard forks, it's sort of a more complex question, because again, we're talking about, well, what is a valid chain? But that gets to, well, what sort of nodes do people run? And I think this is kind of the most common setup. This happens to be, if I remember correctly, Start9 Labs box. And usually people run these things 24/7. Maybe also might run a node on VPS and so on. But the important thing is, in this kind of category of node, usually people have all of the blockchain data, which is roughly a terabyte of space these days. And the node runs 24/7, and it's always on to go and propagate data around. And also, it does, as byproduct, the supply rules. But again, if all it's doing is just sitting there propagating data around, I mean, how much of a say does it really have? What happens if people want to go change the rules? I mean, you have a box that previously was doing something, and you might in the future be doing nothing. But it by itself doesn't do anything. It's just data. It gets to the other sort of node I want to go and talk about, which is your economic nodes. Now that happens to be my laptop. That happens to be sitting at a cafe in Ibiza. And at that moment, it is actually running a full node. Now that particular type of node is a prune node because it doesn't have all the archival data. But the important thing is it knows what coins exist at any moment, so that when new blocks come in, and it sees that new data, it can say, hang on a second, is this valid? Well, is it spending coins that are real? Is it spending them according to protocol? Yes, no. And since that data is much smaller than all the archival data, well, it takes like roughly 10 gigs of disk space. Now, I call this an economic node because, in my case, I'm using it for something economic, which is, well, that's the example of my Wasabi wallet, looking at the settings. If you look kind of way down there, Bitcoin peer-to-peer endpoint, if you know a little bit about computer networking, you'll see 1.7 was 0.0.1. That, of course, is talking to my own computer. And you can actually see this. I mean, this is like Bitcoin's Core's list of connections. Right at the top is actually my Wasabi wallet connecting to my own node, which means that that node forms an economic purpose. So I'm using it to validate my own transactions, and in particular, the transactions that send me money from other people. Thus, if someone tries to go change Bitcoin, I will directly know about this, and my wallet will reject their coins. Which finally gets to, well, the sort of case study I want to go show, which is this dude. Anyone know who this guy is? Anyone else being sued by him? Yeah, so that's Craig Wright, who, of course, is Satoshi Nakamoto. Please don't sue me again. And currently, I have 2 lawsuits against me and a bunch of other devs, and for 2 different reasons. They're in UK courts, and one of them is called basically the database, we kind of refer to it as the database rights case, where Craig Wright is claiming that since, of course, he invented Bitcoin under UK law, he has rights to the Bitcoin database, and thus he can stop anyone from running a node or doing transactions and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whatever. But for our purposes, why you should run a node, I think the first lawsuit that I got against me was much more interesting, which is he claims that being who he is. He happened to have, a few $1 billion worth of coins. And he claims that some hackers got into his office and deleted the private keys for those coins. And he claimed being a security expert, a world-renowned security expert. He did what any reasonable person would do in that situation is, turn off his computers and then do some, oh wait, no, that's not what he claimed. No, he claimed that he went and deleted all his hard drives to make sure that the hackers wouldn't get further. I mean, personally, I would have just turned the computers off, because last I checked, the hard drive that's turned off can't really do much. But that's what he claims. Of course, since he deleted all his hard drives, there's of course no way he can get his money back because he destroyed the only copy of his private keys. Obviously quite convenient there. And obviously, if you're in that situation, well, the first thing to do is go sue people and force them to go make a change to the Bitcoin software to get your keys back. Now, what would that change look like? Well, currently the rule is if you don't have a private key and can't produce a valid signature, Bitcoin does not allow coins to move. You need valid signatures to allow coins to move. He wants a special exception there to allow, quote unquote, his coins to move without a valid signature. This, of course, is a hard one because we are loosening the rules. And the interesting thing is, well, it would be quite possible for him to write the code to change this. He could do it tomorrow, right? He could write a version of Bitcoin Core with a couple lines changed to let him get access to those coins. Now, the interesting question is, well, let's suppose he does this. How many people in this room are going to run that code? No one? Oh, come on, at least one person put up their hand. Come on. All right, you will run that code. All right, so you're going to run this code, and let's presume that some miners also run that code and they go mine some blocks. And now we have some data with this magical transaction with a signature giving Craig right back all of these coins he supposedly owns. Of course, that transaction will get into a block, and that block will get to your node, and your node will accept it, because from your point of view, that's a valid block. Everyone else's nodes will just drop it on the floor, because that's obviously absurd. It breaks the rules. And, from your point of view, Craig has his coins back. I mean, we could even add some more rules to, I don't know, maybe make sure that, that chain doesn't get overridden by more hash power, so on. But, I mean, without getting into the details there, I think the important thing to realize is, well, why do you run a full node? So that guys like that, you can choose whether or not to follow their rules. That's really all it comes down to. Because if you guys don't run a full node, and you happen to go run Electrum, and sure enough, the person behind Electrum is running Craig Write code on, all Electrum servers, or okay, maybe one Electrum server, maybe half an Electrum server, because he'll probably run both versions. But certainly, if your Electrum wall was pointed at that server, because Electrum doesn't validate, it doesn't know whether or not these transactions are valid. Simple as that. If you don't, if enough people don't run full nodes, or at least don't hook to people who trust full nodes, guys like that can win. That's really all it comes down to. And, it's a funny thing because real life, if you run Electrum, even in this circumstance, it's extremely unlikely you're going to end up connected to a node that follows this guy's crazy rules. But when push comes to shove, I mean, in the legal system, I'm a lot more vulnerable if it looks like he can win. All right, because think about it, I'm defending a court case. One of the easiest ways for me to defend is, look, what he's asking us to do is impossible. Well, why is it impossible? Because you guys already have it. The less you do that, the less convincing that argument looks. So, since we're late for lunch, I'll just leave it at that. Please run a full node. Any questions?
So, can you And we think this is really interesting to understand a little bit more. What do you think are the most powerful economic nodes out there in the network? Like, are there exchanges? Are there political circles, merchants? What do you think? What are the most economic powerful nodes?
Yeah, so the question is like, what are the most powerful economic nodes? You know, the truth is, like, it's very hard to tell because it really comes down to what type of change are we talking about and what are the circumstances. And I think exchanges are a good example of this, where you could argue that exchanges, because they deal with so much money, are the most powerful economic nodes, maybe the highest resistance change. But at the same time, when you look at it from the exchange point of view, well, let's suppose that there is a legitimate split in perception of what Bitcoin should be. An exchange can make money by trading both sides of a split. So in that sense, the economic nodes of exchanges are not preventing a split, right? If a split happens through a way that's quote unquote legitimate, the exchange will happily just do both sides. And you could argue that maybe they're reinforcing the split, right? Maybe they're providing more power to the split, but they aren't necessarily taking a side because they're willing to trade both sides. On the other hand, if we're talking about something that everyone agrees is illegitimate, such as, let's face it, Craig Wright's viewpoints is a minority viewpoint at best, then certainly exchanges could have a lot of power to go and say to, well, I mean, frankly, to say to courts, like, obviously, what Craig Wright's trying to do is bullshit. I mean, we're not going to run that because we would be effectively allowing fraud to happen. And I should point out, I mean, quite a lot of the coins that Craig Wright claims to have got stolen, turns out they came from the Mt. Gox hack. So, quite seriously, you could make a good argument that going along with Craig Wright's idea that he should get those coins is going along with the theft. Because it certainly looks like if they are Craig Wright's coins, Craig Wright is one of the Mt. Gox hackers and stolen, a few $1 billion. So, do you go along with that theft or not? I mean, maybe an exchange provides a lot of counterbalance to that by saying, look, we trade billions of dollars every day. We are refusing to have anything to do with this. But yeah, I don't know that this has an easy answer.
Any more questions?
Peter, could you just update us on the status of the Wright cases, whether you need any help, assistance in any form, and whether you're planning to appear at any of the hearings?
Well, so the current status is that, Craig Wright's involved in a ton of lawsuits right now. And there's multiple overlapping ones that all kind of hinge around the issue of, is Craig Wright Satoshi? And very closely related question to that is, are these coins his? And my understanding is there's movement in the UK court system to essentially combine a bunch of these cases into one for the purpose of establishing whether or not Craig Wright's Satoshi, as well as the sort of secondary purpose of establishing whether or not he owns any of these coins. And if that goes through, great, because then something like 3 or 4 cases will be combined into one for that initial purpose, and then Craig will get to argue court, is he actually Satoshi? Now, in terms of the second thing of, well, what help do we need? Quite frankly, all this stuff, depending on how it goes, costs millions of dollars in legal fees. And we have donations to cover this. I think it's bitcoindefense.org. Someone should Google that. But there is an organization that's been set up to provide legal defense, both for this case and a few others. And right now we have donations from Jack Dorsey, as an example. But certainly, more helps. And I don't think this problem is going to go away. First of all, Craig Wright seems to have an unbounded appetite for lawsuits and quite a bit of funding to do so. And he's also, in many cases, skipped out on payments because, he has lost cases. He's been ordered to go pay a lot of money by courts multiple times over, and he's just refused to go pay. And unfortunately, the way the legal system works is in civil cases, which all this stuff is, there really aren't many opportunities other than trying to somehow get people's assets. And if they don't have any assets, what can you do? And then the second issue is just in general, the thing Craig Wright's doing can be repeated. And it can be repeated in other ways. So certainly having a bigger legal defense fund helps everyone. And I will say, my personal opinion on this too is that it's very unfortunate that more of the open source community hasn't taken up this defense. Things like the Electronic Freedom Foundation and the free the GNU Foundation. Because when you think about it, a lot of this comes down to, well, what license, what rights does things like BSD license allow? And one of the legal theories here is, well, you have a duty of care that extends very far to even like undue transactions. This is a threat to all of open source. If all of open source is not protected by things like the MIT license, which very clearly say there isn't a warranty, you do not have, you can't go after the authors to go and make them possible happen, then I think we all have a problem. And that extends to much more than the Bitcoin world.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, then I would say we finish now and go for the lunch break. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Peter.